Hey everybody, my name is Alex and this is Lunchbox Radio. Now, before we get started, I wanted to do what is going to be a usual plug here for a little bit, and that is for my new thing that I got going on, and that is the website that you see behind me. It is actually called bentobox.ghost.io. There will always be a QR code somewhere on screen for you to go check it out with your phone. If you're listening to this, you can also find the link in the description of the podcast episode. But if you're watching it or you want to watch it over on YouTube, you'll also be able to find that link in the description of the YouTube channel. Absolutely. I'm not sure if I can post them in the description of each video yet. I did all the steps, but I'm not sure if they took yet. So definitely go check that out. There's a bunch of stuff up there, including my write-ups from Anime NYC, including a bunch of podcasts so far, including this one by the time that you're seeing this, as well as a very topical interview that I did at Anime NYC with Hiromi Wakabayashi and Hiroyuki Imaishi of Studio Trigger about new panty and stocking with garter belt. But the reason why it's relevant here is we're about to talk about a very well-known cult classic Gainax show that, at the very least, Imaishi worked on. I think that Wakabayashi also worked on back when they were still at Gainax with not a shambolic mess. So, without further ado, let's jump into what we're talking about this week with a synopsis from my assistant. Why don't you tell us the plot of FLCL? AKA Fooly Cooly.
Nothing really special ever happens here. In this place. School sucks. My dad's a weirdo. Then there's my brother's girlfriend. I don't even know what to say about her. Anyway, life was pretty slow. Until she came along. Next thing I knew, I had things coming out of my head.
It's weird, not normal, these horns sticking out.
And I had a robot living in my house. And well, a bunch of other weird stuff.
You're the one who caused all this!
I don't care!
But that alien girl, she's kind of cool, I guess.
Don't lie, you like her.
Whatever. It's really not.
With the synopsis out of the way, I want to talk about something a little odd for just a second here. And that odd thing is actually the creative intention behind different projects. Somebody on a TikTok I saw a while back said something really interesting about art and artists and the modern world and how artists have to think and how it works. And that is the idea that art isn't finished product, isn't really the point of art. The finished product is the byproduct of creativity and of people wanting and needing to create things. A perfect example of this from me personally is that I draw every day. I spend at the very least 30 minutes to a couple hours drawing every day. Now, I don't show many of these drawings to anyone. You can go and you can see a selection of them that I've posted over on Instagram, and you can find that link at the bottom of bentobox.ghost.io. But that finished piece isn't necessarily where the value is in the effort, the materials, the thought process, all of that stuff. And if you look at the most famous art, that's kind of the thing, and it abstracts even more with things like modern art, like a banana taped to a wall sold for over 60 grand. Banksy stuff doesn't necessarily take a huge amount of time, but the kind of mythos and legend around Banksy and that work is what makes it so impactful. So the reason why I'm saying this is because when FLCL was first conceived of, it was coming off the backs of things like Evangelion, which were immensely taxing on everybody who worked on it. A lot of the people who worked on Evangelion went and worked on first Carcano and then FLCL. And in conceiving of FLCL as a, not even a show, but as a OVA, Studio Gainax and the people behind FLCL sought to make something that was freer, less heavy, and less story intensive, so they could have more fun with it. And if you look at something like, say, first Panty and Stocking with Garbelt and now new Panty and Stocking with Garbelt, that kind of playful atmosphere was started, that Trigger had displayed and that first Gainax displayed and then later Trigger displayed in those shows. It really started here. You can see that playfulness even in something like Hill, in something like Gurren Lagann, in this. And that's a huge deal for a couple of reasons. But the biggest reason is that it felt, watching this thing feels like you're watching animators have fun and animators play around. You can see that from the earliest parts, where in the first episode, they zoom out to a trailer on the set of a film shoot, and all the characters in the scene are hanging out in the trailer and talking to each other very metatextually about what you were just watched. And you can see that in things like the manga panel sequences in the show that are incredibly difficult to animate and compose and deal with, but they do them anyway. And there's so much in this show and so much in a lot of OVAs that are just studios throwing budget at art and artists to go through their full process for once. Famously, the OVA, the also 6th episode, I believe, OVA of Golden Boy is wildly, incredibly animated even now, even though it came out in the 90s, clearly, in the 90s, early 2000s, because they gave themselves the space to do it. And I know that a lot of people really love to talk about FLCL and symbolism and all this stuff, and we'll get to that. But in the back of your head, always keep in mind that this was a project by a studio to help nurture its younger talent in an environment that was less focused on rigid adherence to style and to the end product. It was designed to be more playful and feel less constrained in the ways that something like Evangelion felt as a huge, impactful thing. They wanted to get away with that, and they started doing that with Carcano, but Carcano was still, it is an adaptation of a work, and so they didn't really have necessarily all the freedom to do what they wanted to there. And also Carcano as a work in Gainax's pantheon is very different from everything else, because lots of the stuff by Gainax is very otaku focused, very metatextual, very in its own feelings about stuff. And then you have Carcano, which, while it still meets that super high bar, Carcano was my first full DVD box set. I still have the thing. It's falling apart at the seams. I open it up and the little plastic trays slide out at this point. But it had to be more rigid because it was, once again, an adaptation of a source material that they didn't have full say over. And also, I don't think I could be very wrong about this, but I don't think that the person who, the primary artist of the manga for Carcano, cared for the adaptation very much. I could be horribly wrong about that, though. But my point is that when you're thinking about FLCL, you can think about it on the very raw level of the story and those qualities of it, but you should also think of it as a product of creative people made to help creative people get better at their craft. And I think that's really important, especially with where not just Gainax would go, but with where Gainax would go that kind of forced the birth of Studio Trigger. So just keep that in mind. Now, let's talk about the story, because I think that FLCL gets a certain reputation because it's been a cult classic since the year 2000. Since the second it was out, it was like this lauded gemstone of a thing that people love, and people love for a lot of different reasons. But it does have a story, and the story does have a progression, and nothing in it, everything seems crazy in it, but nothing in it happens just to happen. The things you see pulled from it are all fit neatly in a traditional storyline. They make some amount of sense. Lots of people will tell you that it's just craziness plus the pillows, and that it's a pillows music video, and it's like super experimental animation. It is that to a certain extent, but it's not the same people are making it sound. And so I do write-ups for all the shows that I talk about now over at bento-box.io. You can go read the thing I did about this one, and I really got in my feelings about the sequels, because the sequels are made, the 4 sequels that exist are made by people and teams that were largely not involved with the primary original 6-episode OVA. And part of the reason why I'm making this episode at all is because you can't actually find the original FLCL streaming easily, I think. And it bothered me that when I went to Crunchyroll, I couldn't find the original FLCL. But here's the interesting thing. They have all of the other seasons, meaning the seasons that were produced over close to 20 years later by Production IG and in collaboration with Cartoon Network and American producers. And the reason why they did that was because they wanted to recapture the magic. Because I can't really describe to you, if you became an anime fan later, how much of a hold FLCL had and still has on now otaku of a certain age. So I'll give you a little anecdote here. When I was in middle school, I was already fully engrossed. I was already deep in it. Because I started watching anime consciously when I was around 9. And then by middle school, I was dressing up as Dragon Ball Z characters for Halloween when I was in 5th grade. So by the time I'm in middle school and I'm in my early teens, I'm already on the hard stuff, so to speak. And I had a little tape trading into DVD trading, and also the entire time manga trading thing going on with all of my other deeply anime-obsessed nerdy friends. This was in the middle of the anime bubble, when anime was niche but on its first come up. We were on our way to the Cool Japan era, where Cool Japan started. And I had been trading manga back and forth with a friend of mine, and she was giving me volumes of Love Hina, and I was giving her volumes of whatever I had. Because she had the entire 14-volume run of Love Hina at the time. And in addition to getting busted reading ecchi harem manga in the early aughts in middle school, and almost getting sent to detention / the principal's office a couple times for that, I also encountered something pretty interesting. And that interesting thing was that I was actually trading manga back and forth with someone else. Someone who I wouldn't, and I'm not going to use names here for all kinds of reasons, but because I don't want to put anybody on blast unintentionally. But I would trade manga not only with this friend of mine, but with her older sister by proxy, because that friend would come home, say, in the case of this story, the first 2 volumes of FLC, and then she came back, and I was ready to give her the 2 volumes of Love Hina back, and she was like, "You're not going to get the volumes of FLCL back for at least another week." And I was like, "Why?" And she just straight up looked at me and she was like, "My sister has them." She said, "You can have them back when she's done." And so I had this pen pal through manga experience with essentially an upperclassman who I wouldn't meet for several years, at least, because of this property, because of FLCL, because of those manga. And once we met, We were fast friends. She immediately was like, "You're the one I stole the FLCL manga from for a month." Yep, that's me. And we were friends for many years afterwards. I have no doubt that if I ran into her, we would still be like, "Oh, hey," because it's happened here and there over the years. But that should give you an idea of how important to the otaku identity, a certain age of otaku right now, FLCL is. And a lot of that is because of its subject matter and because of the way it presents its subject matter and it talks about its subject matter. Because, once again, this is an animated project meant to help young animators hone their skills and sharpen their pencils, so to speak. But the thing had to have a story, and the story it elected to go with was a story about growing up and about what it means to be a grown up and how together grown-ups have it or don't have it, and the choices that the world makes you, convinces you that you have to make in order to be a grown-up, and the kind of trust level you should have with the grown-ups in your life. Now, there are other characters here and there that are echoes of equivalent characters in something like FLCL. Off the top of my head, the teacher character in Air Gear. This is a weird one, but I promise it makes sense. The Itzy teacher character in Air Gear has some real echoes of the teacher in Abase Junior High in FLCL. And that character, whose name I totally forget, but she's kind of a light play on what the whole show gets at a little when it comes to all of its adult characters. And that is that these characters largely have no idea what they're doing. Because in the way that being a kid doesn't necessarily come with a manual, being an adult doesn't come with one either. And so much of what you see, and if you're listening to this and you are in high school or or even in college, and you're worried about growing up and becoming an adult and all that stuff, don't worry. Everyone barely has any idea what's going on, and it's fine. Well, it's not fine, but it's fine. And this show kind of displays that immaculately. And hilariously, probably the person who has their shit the most together is a side character named Kitsurubami, who is Amarao's underling in the show, who shows up, I think, in episode 4, I think is when you see her first. Actually, you might see her first in episode 2 or whatever. But the thing you realize pretty quickly is the reason she has it together is because the person who's in charge of her, like Amarao, he doesn't have full grasp on anything, really. But even the people who seem to be, even the adult characters who seem to be in the most control, Haruko, for example, they are feigning competence by way of confidence. Haruko is a mess, and the camera treats her like that. Naota has this immense crush on her, sees her as incredibly beautiful, but the camera sees her for who and what she is. She's a selfish asshole who keeps breaking laws to essentially get close to her, to the crush she's had for God knows how long, and she's willing to use anybody to do it. And this narrative and relationship between her and Naota really talks about who you should put your trust in, just in general, but as a kid, and the recognition that, not recognition, but inability oftentimes to recognize who you should be putting your trust in, and the way adults can manipulate kids in ways that they don't even see coming. And the ways that adults can recognize things in kids that they can take advantage of. Because the thing with Haruko is very clearly taking advantage of Naruto for the entirety of the 6 episodes. And actually, the only thing that they get more or less right in although we'll get to these in a second, but in the sequels, is that Haruko continues to take advantage of people. She shows up and she takes advantage of kids. That's her role throughout the original and the much worse seasons of the show, subsequent revivals of the show, is that she shows up and she takes advantage of people to get what she wants. And what she wants is nebulous, but it seems to suggest that she's in love with Adamus, who is this big, interdimensional, cosmic energy bird thing who she's after. And through that kind of relationship, the story uses Naoto's relationship with Haruko and with Mamimi, with every female character, with Haruko, Mamimi, and Ninamori, and less so his male friends, but primarily with those three, to show his growth as a young boy, to show his adolescent growing up, because that's what the show really is truly about. It's about growing up, and it's about young boys growing up. There's a movie, I forget the director's name, but he's really famous. He made this movie called Boyhood that took forever to shoot because it is essentially the entire progression of a young boy's life, and it followed him growing up. And they did it, and it's scripted, and it's not like a documentary thing, but it's scripted, but they did it with the same actor all the way through. So it's like real-time progression of an actual human playing a character, but also not a little. The line's very blurry in it. But what FLCL is doing is something similar, but in a way compressed way and for a way more specific set of time. And that time is like mid to late middle school to beginning of high school. And if you've been not even a young boy, but a young person in that very specific time, that shift from you're at the top of the food chain in 8th grade to you're at the bottom of the food chain, but you're older now in 9th grade, that shift is a really formative time for a lot of people. Like, you have, and this is one of the reasons why I think that a lot of anime focuses on school-age children, middle school, high school, that kind of thing, is that you have this unique amount of free time as a young kid. And yes, you have an abundance of free time as an adult, but you also have the responsibilities of needing to work to support yourself and your life and your family and the whole rigmarole of living. But as a kid, in many scenarios, not in all scenarios, certainly not in all scenarios, you are guarded from a lot of that. Oftentimes, if you're taking a job, you're doing it because you want extra money for a hobby. You're not necessarily taking the job all the time, especially as a, granted, very privileged kid like Naruto or lots of kids are. You're not taking the jobs because you have to, oftentimes. There are certainly tragedy stories about that, and those aren't insignificant, but the standard, well, not standard, but very common kid experience is one of a lot of freedom. Even when you do have responsibilities and stuff placed on you, oftentimes people are a lot more relaxed. You are given a lot more free space. You're given space to fail, space to experiment, space to grow. And that transition period between middle school and high school is really important, because that's the first time you're starting to truly grow up. You're starting to truly, preteens into teenagedom. It's the first time when you start to experience, when you start to know what to do with the mounds of time, when things start to be really important. Think how you look to girls, how you look to boys, how you interact with the world, what you want to say about yourself to others. And that is very much what Naruto and the entire younger cast of FLCL is trying to do. Mamimi's a little different. We'll get to her in a second. But Ninamori in episode 4 or 5, Ninamori, when she's introduced and when she's really focused on for the first time, is seen as really trying to project quality of being an adult that is not uncommon for kids, for any amount of kid, for any level of child to want to try and be. She eats the spicy curry that kills both Naruto, that almost kills both Naruto and Naruto's dad and Naruto's grandpa, and doesn't flinch because she wants to seem like she's an adult. But the interesting thing is Haruko, looking at her, kind of knows. Because the one thing that Haruko does have going for it is that she is completely and violently, quite literally, independent. And even if she's from outer space, at some point she was Nina Mori's age. And at some point she probably had those feelings and grew up into whatever she grew up into. Haruko. But Nina Mori is having a really tumultuous family life at that point, at all points in the show. But her way of coping is trying to be the adult presence in her own life when it feels to her like the adults in her life just refuse to do it because her dad is ripping his own family apart by cheating with his secretary and doing shady business deals as the mayor of Mabase, the fictional town they live in. But once again, on screen, very often the most comedic characters are adults in the room. Once Naota struggles and he says he hates the spicy curry, but the grandpa and Kamon, his father, are the ones who keel over dead, who have the extreme cartoon reaction. In that first manga page scene, the one who's a straight man is Naota is a straight man unintentionally along most of the way through the show. And what you see in the show is Naota and Nina Mori and all the younger middle school characters are growing up. And by the one of the last scenes of the OVA entirely is Naota and all of his friends and Nina Mori, who very much implied is sticking around because she likes him, sticking around in this group of idiots because she likes Naota, in high school uniforms, sharing drinks after class. But it almost feels like the further into being an adult you get in the show, the more cartoonist the show's camera and the writing treats the character. So probably the most adult character is Amurao. And Amurao is ridiculous. He wears these insane fake eyebrows. He does the same thing that Haruko does, but immensely less effectively, in that he feigns competence with confidence. And the reason why I keep saying that is because he cloaks himself in secret agent, government agent vibe, but he never really knows what the hell is going on. He never can control or stop any of it. And in between doing all that stuff, he's doing insane things like dissecting a curried meat bun, or obsessing over Haruko, who he obviously has a thing for too. Then you have Kamon, who feels like a Gainax stan real otaku. At some point he was a journalist. He no longer is. He basically runs a bakery and this local fanzine that is responsible, interestingly enough, for wrecking Mori's home life. But he's really childish. He's spiteful. He's all the bad things. He's all the sociopathic things that you associate with a child. Like I said, Kitsurabami is probably the most competent adult in the show, because once again she has to deal with a lot of the deeply incompetent adults in the show. And here's why I want to talk about Momimi, because Momimi is lost puppy for this entire show, for much of the show. She is the ex-girlfriend ultimately of Naota's older brother, who basically leaves and dumps her and doesn't tell her that he leaves and dumps her. The other kind of universal thing about all the adults in the show is they're all shitheads. They're all assholes. None of them are, maybe with the slight exception of Kamon later in some key moments, but none of them are really out to do their best by the younger members of the cast. The teacher feels really the teacher character who I brought up earlier is obviously really put upon, obviously doing her best, but shouldn't be in charge of children kind of thing. Junko is actually her name. The grandpa is borderline senile Haruko, and Amaral is ostensibly trying to protect the Earth and in the process Naota, but he's terrible at it. And he's straight up incompetent on every level. But the thing that you see in his older brother's case is that Naota's older brother is embracing that shittiness of being an adult by sending a letter and a picture to his younger brother and saying, hey, break up with my Japanese girlfriend by proxy for me. That is unbelievable shithead behavior. He deserves to have Mamimi get on a plane, go over to America, find him, and turbo kick him in the nuts in front of his current girlfriend. That is an unbelievably shitty move. Even if you aren't going to call your girlfriend who you're technically still dating, you send her that letter. You don't loop somebody in by proxy and then make them have to deal with it. Especially a family member who you're assuming, who the show pretty much tells you has had a lot of interactions, and there was a version of Mamimi's and Naota's relationship that was intensely positive. Where, like, Naota probably had some feelings about Mamimi that weren't completely pure. He's a preteen boy. But there was a clear line drawn. It felt more like a surrogate older sister thing. And then by Naota's older brother just noping out of the situation and leaving and giving the information that Mamimi needs to be able to move on and start exploring what the hell it looks like not to date this jackass to his brother instead of directly to her, you've created a situation where Naota knows that he broke up with her. Mamimi knows, or suspects that to be the case, but it's not really almost ever, it's not confirmed for her for a while. And so she's left in this in-between state emotionally, which she's just not prepared to deal with it. It's an incredibly shitty situation, on top of the fact that she's not the most stable person. And it's such a delicate and specific vibe that they're using to amplify this a very close, undefined relationship with an older woman that people have when they're young, when they're preteen boys, when they're preteen kids, or even in adulthood. That unnamed lust and love and codependency and all of this stuff, and Naota gives into it very often, and he says, I should stay with Mamimi forever, period, end. And Mamimi eventually grows up and sorts her way through it in a deeply messy, deeply unhealthy at many points way. But her and Naota are basically tortured through the entire show. And at points do the work of torturing each other in the process. And the whole thing is this hormone-induced emotional layer cake about growing up and about what it looks like to grow up, and the fact that it's never clean, and the fact that the results of growing up are never clean, and that maybe you should look at the adults in your life with some skepticism and some untinted glasses because they're not the authority figures ever thought they were. Naota's dad was a journalist. He's written a book, granted, about the deep mysteries of Eva, but he wrote a book. But he's kind of still a shithead. There are moments when he puts his bullshit in a box and he does his best with Naota because he's trying to do something good for his son, but those seem incidental. Amaral is an idiot. Once again, the one who comes out the best here is Kisarabami, and that's mostly because she's like doing a job and doing her best, but no one really helps her, and she gets wildly hurt all the time. It sucks. Now is here where I want to talk about the sequels. The sequels are bad, but the reason they're bad is because they don't have this, and I've probably talked about this before on the podcast, but if you've ever watched something and you've ever thought, these are the only people who can make this, it can't be repeated, that's wrong. If you're watching something on any kind of level that was produced, it can be produced again. That lightning in a bottle is often not lightning in a bottle. It's just a standard drink mix. But the pieces need to be in the right place, the right time, and the puzzle needs to come together very carefully. If you look at something like old panty and stocking versus new panty and stocking, those two things fit together really well because a lot of the same people carried over from the old one into the new one, and the reason it didn't happen more quickly is a matter of real-world licensing bullshit that finally worked out. But they did it again with the new panty and stocking. It is everything and more that the old panty and stocking was. And it's even doing it with modern references and the whole 9 yards. So what that says is that you can make another FLCL. It's possible. But you need to take on the job in earnest. And that's what didn't happen with the sequels. Are a bunch of people dragging something back to life in the name of nostalgia and profit. And I said earlier that one of the things the sequels seem to get exclusively right is that Haruko is using people. But the key difference between, and I don't know which one is which entirely, so don't murder me for this, but the key difference between any of the 4 sequels and the Haruko there and any of the original 6 episodes is those sequels treat Haruko almost like a mascot character. She's designed to be idolized and woo you in much the way that a Zoe Deschanel manic pixie dream girl character might be. But in the original, even if she is in a red bunny suit, surfing on her guitar, in the sky, doing cool shit, the camera still knows she's a moron, that she doesn't know what's going on, that she's not in full control. Hell, the end of the show ends with her losing what she had in front of her and blaming someone else when she had no idea how to even make happen in the first place. She knew the steps, but didn't really know what was going to happen next, didn't anticipate any of it. She was using people the entire time to get to that point. So it's not Naota's fault that Adamisk ran. He was always going to run because she not doing any of it really herself. But they stripped all of that stuff away because they just want the zany, oh look, here are the key points of an FLCL. Is that something you want? Is that something that you'll pay for, more importantly? And it just lacks the soul and the heart of the original thing. I think if you're looking for something to watch, if you watch and you find FLCL and you're looking for something to watch in the vein of FLCL that feels like it came next, I would actually turn to that director's most recent work, at least in my mind, and that is Gundam Clux. Multiple times in Gundam Clux, I was watching this thing and I said, they are implementing the vibe and stylings of FLCL, but they're applying it to a Gundam show. And that fascinated me for the entire way through that show, because what it showed was they can do this. The reason why the FLCL Grunge, Suge, the 4 of them, don't nail the execution is because they didn't want to go and say, hey, do you want to do more of this? Because they wanted a definite yes. Where Gundam Clux absolutely nails the wishy-washy feelings of growing up and all of these, and all of the growing up and growing pains, what's it called, narrative of the original FLCL. But the interesting thing there is that it uses the giant robot lens to apply that same feeling and vibe to a female character. And I found that really interesting because watching, I forget the main character's name, watching the main character of Gundam Clux feels like watching Naota very often, but from a female perspective. She has the same kind of hang-ups and the same desperate attempts that Naota has, but all built around the Gundam universe. And I found that really interesting because, like I said, the 4 sequel seasons that they have to FLCL are useless. They're not in their feelings enough. They try to create a formula out of something that was a vibe. So there's this great scene in the episode, I think maybe episode 5, but the great scene in a Brittle Bullet episode, actually, where Amaral's getting a haircut. And they shift back and forth between Amaral and Kitsurubami. And every time they shift back to Amaral, it's in a different animation style. First, normal style. Second, a slightly more super exaggerated, slightly deformed style. And the third style is just South Park. And it's panel moments from before. It has that vibe of like having fun, they're messing around. This feels like an animator's project. But then you look at something like, I think it's Grunge, I think it's FLCL Grunge, the one with the female protagonist. They do like the most lazy version of that. And it doesn't feel right because it's not right. Because it's not, like, the haircut scene for Amaral is so much about layering on references in a way that doesn't feel natural because it's not, but feels consequential and feels like it is referential. It is an admission to of pop culture that you now see in something like New Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt. There's an episode very early on in that show where it's just all the main characters decide to play decide to play a weird version of Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic the Gathering at the same time because the creators wanted to have a conversation about and have fun with the idea about trading card games since they are a huge thing in the anime space. Trading card games like Yu-Gi-Oh! Have subsequent anime attached to them. Yu-Gi-Oh! Card Fight Buddy, whatever the hell, lots of stuff. But those sequels don't, it's not, like I said, if you've seen FLCL but you haven't seen Gundam Clux and you have access to a Amazon Prime account, I encourage you to go watch Gundam Clux. I think it's all dubbed, which helps. Because you will see the DNA of FLCL in that thing. You can see the DNA of FLCL in a lot of things. Like I said at the very beginning of this, you see the DNA of the teacher Junko in the ditzy teacher in Air Gear years later. That's wild. Some of that can be boiled down to like blah blah blah, but it's so clear in something like Clux that you can just, there's storytelling devices that you can use again. And the biggest problem with the storytelling devices that you can use again and vibes that you can capture again, and the biggest problem with the sequels is they are cash grabs. They're using all of the ingredients without an understanding of the final thing they're making. They're technically making cookies, but like the balances are all wrong. They cooked for a little too long or a little too little. And you see the results. And the thing I think is interesting is that the 4 sequels, don't diminish the original thing. If you haven't seen the original thing or you only watch one of the sequels and you like the ducks, I encourage you to go watch the original FLCL. It's worth your time. It always will be. But those 4 sequels still exist, and that's the problem. And like I said earlier, part of the reason I did this episode was because the original show isn't up on Crunchyroll. I'm not entirely sure where it is. I have my copies in multiple different ways at this point. You can find it, but as far as I saw, it's not on the biggest anime streaming platform where it was. Funimation, the original licenser, does not exist anymore. That's not good. The fact that you can... This is going to be my last rant, but it's important, so buckle up. FLCL being listed on Crunchyroll, but only having the 4 sequel seasons feels the way it feels to watch Fortnite introduce another partnership. It feels like the thing that's valuable is the idea of the brand and not the actual thing it represents. I'm not saying that I don't get excited as hell when they introduce the idea that you can play as the gorillas, but you don't need to do that. It's a way of injecting cash into the gorillas, so fine. Into the project that is the gorillas, so fine, but it's not that stuff is what the gorillas are about. They included that to get people like me to play Fortnite again after a bunch of months. Like, hey, Jujutsu Kaisen, wasn't what got him. Our Naruto deal wasn't what got him. Maybe this will. And I think that's a lot of what's happening with all the sequel stuff and like all sequel fatigue and like behemoth problems that are with Marvel, is that like the people who make things, but the people who employ the people who make things are learning the wrong lessons. Perfect example here is the Barbie movie. There's a lot of reasons that movie was successful. It's not the toy tie-in part. That was the mechanism that they used to tell a story about feminism, the way that people look at women, and the way that young girls are taught to look at themselves. But what comes out of that is a Hot Wheels movie. Greenlight all these Hasbro properties for movies like Polly friggin' Pocket. I saw an insane one. I was like, oh, yep. They continue to learn the wrong lessons from the Barbie movie. It doesn't even need to be a single property. The Barbenheimer phenomenon is something they've since tried to like with other movies. They've since tried to pair up other weird movies. Like I think they tried to pair up a Saw movie with a freaking Paw Patrol movie. It got weird. And I think that FLCL fell victim to that. The unfortunate part is like, Barbenheimer phenomenon, who cares? That's just like a weird, fun thing people did with 2 very good films, but a weird, fun thing people did. It doesn't need to repeat. With FLC, it's capable of repeating, they just didn't do it. Instead, it happened many years later with a Gundam show because it was from the same director and some of the same staff, and they saw an opportunity to have a conversation about that for the opposite gender. On that note, if you like this episode, new episodes come out every Thursday. You find episodes and more, including, and I'm going to put the QR code back up on screen if you're not watching. So if you're not watching this on your phone, you can find it. And if you are not watching it, and you're listening to this, you can go to YouTube and look up Bento Radio and you'll find the podcast. You can also find all of that stuff over on my site, bento-box.ghost.io. It's a mouthful, I know. Said if you like the podcast, new episodes come out every Thursday. You can find all the links to follow me in all the places over on bento-box.ghost.io. And on that note, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio, and we'll talk to you next time.